So again, what is the trigger that's all of a sudden going to exacerbate this problem so drastically and so dramatically that we potentially exceed that peak hit in June of last year, especially when there is a willingness, if you will, or an acceptance of the reality that we will be weathering some kind of a recession?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think, by the way, that the 3 to 4 bound, if we could maintain that is the best possible outcome. I'm not saying that's out of the question. I look at it and I think it's unlikely. We've talked about some of the reasons why. That is, in my view, a perfect landing of the inflation situation. Absolutely no one, to my knowledge, no one is saying we can get back to 2% anytime in the medium term. Could we run at 3 or 4%? It's possible. That is the best of all outcomes that I see, just looking at the factors, the data that we've been talking about. So I think seeing something, and the other point, Michelle, just to mention, is interesting study that was done last fall by Deutsche Bank that showed, once you've entered that 8% zone for any sustained period of time, even a few months, looking at all the data that's available from the 20th century, it's very unlikely that you can keep inflation down below that 8% level for very long, that it takes several years to work it out back down to, let's call, whatever the normal level might be. And yes, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not a linear path. You do have these easings and tightenings of inflation. That's not the right term, but you know what I mean, lowering of prices and then spiraling back up to a higher level than what was set before. When I look at things like, again, now moving slightly away from CPI, what's happening in the electricity markets, what's happening in food, I just don't see it easing in that sense. We have a conflict situation in Europe that isn't getting better, it's getting worse. Right. And what I haven't mentioned, I think this is, let's say, swings it a bit in the direction of higher inflation, is China is reopening. This is going to be a massive swing in terms of actual supply-demand relationships. At the same time that supply chains really haven't readjusted. In fact, what we're seeing in supply chains coming out of lockdowns and all the lessons learned through both the pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine is that every nation around the world is rethinking their supply chains, reshoring, bringing things back online. That creates inflationary pressure. So you have this correction to the supply chain, localization, reshoring one, and China's reopening. These are massive factors, in my view, that tilt it towards a higher inflation scenario.